Hi, everyone. Welcome to our panel today called Leading Public Sector Transformation. I'm Kelly Rowe. I'm a principal at Nous Group and our government consulting lead for Canada. And we're pleased to support the Leadership Summit today and support IPAC more generally in driving public sector or public administration excellence across Canada. Nous Group Canada is an Ontario-based consulting company. We've been working alongside public sector clients across Canada in the areas of design and digital, as well as organizational transformation, among other areas. It is called Nous Group, but we'll happily take the new group or the French version of that. We leverage our global expertise working with public sector organizations in the UK, in Australia, where we have other offices, to bring relevant practical insights and support to our clients here, who we find are often struggling with similar issues to their Commonwealth peers. Today, we decided to focus on leading transformation because I think based on our discussions with public sector leaders and our experience supporting them to transform their organizations, we know it can be a really tough grind. In fact, some fail, some fall short of expectations, and most are bumpy rides. It's particularly challenging when you can't secure the required level of investment or skills, when senior colleagues or staff add roadblocks, and when the organization becomes tired of being in a state of change and you lose momentum or the sense of direction. So if I could summarize the sentiment in one sentence, it would be the struggle is real. So let's have a real conversation about it. And let's make sure public sector leaders leave this session today with practical, tangible advice that they can take away with them about how to lead large-scale change in their organizations. So some of our themes that we'll touch on today, I'm just going to share screen here. Great. Okay. So some of our themes, we'll touch on today include: what does transformation look like? What is agile governance? How do you navigate some of the roadblocks that I mentioned? How do you make the case for change? So how do you either get the investment or get buy-in from staff across the organization for the change? How do you then manage that change when you're in the thick of it and running a transformation program? How do you make sure you have the right capabilities and capacity? And then realistically, what happens when it goes wrong, and what do you do about it? So I'm excited to welcome our panelists today. We're very fortunate to have three senior public sector leaders join us to share their experiences leading public sector transformation. So we have Aaron Jaffrey from Service Canada, Adel Khalfan from Kensington Health, and Mohammed Qureshi from the Ontario government. So I might hand it over to Aaron to do a brief intro.
Thanks, Kelly. Hi, everybody. Nice to be here with everybody today. My name's Aaron Jaffrey. I am the Director General for Service Experience Design and Delivery at Service Canada. I joined Service Canada about a year ago from the Department for Work and Pensions in the UK, where I've been leading various large-scale transformation projects within the UK context for about 6 years. And yeah, delighted and looking forward to the conversation with Adil and Mohammed today.
Great, thanks, Aaron. Adil, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure, thank you. So my name is Adil Khalfan. Currently, I'm leading the Kensington Health organization in Toronto. Prior to this, I was a Senior Vice President of Health System Performance and Support at Ontario Health. It was an inaugural organization bringing together 22 separate agencies under one umbrella, with quite a big mandate to really transform the healthcare system. And the area that I was leading was looking at health system data, accountability, agreements, and funding. And I've had some experience working abroad in other healthcare sectors in the Middle East, in Pakistan. So I'm looking forward to sharing some experiences in various elements of the world.
Great, thanks, Adil. Mohammed.
Hey, thanks so much, Kelly. Mohammed Qureshi, Corporate CIO and Associate Deputy Minister with the Ontario Government. I run the organization that supports all of the ministries from an I&IT perspective. We have about 4,000 technology staff across all of the ministries. And we do a lot of work helping support and co-create with our agency partners in that space. So when Adil says Ontario Health, we have a CIO directly working with the health sector and Ontario Health and other health entities in the digital services that we need to deliver in the health space.
Right. Thanks, Mohammed. Yeah, thanks very much for joining us today. I'm sure this will be a fruitful discussion, and it will be great to get the perspectives, I think, from the health side and the health system side through to kind of digital transformation all the way over to service transformation within the federal government. So looking forward to that. Just a note to the audience, we're happy to take your questions throughout the session, so please drop them into the chat, and then we'll reserve the last 10 to 15 minutes to take those. So I wanted to start because this term transformation it sounds a bit jargony, and there are a number of what we would call transformational initiatives taking place across government in Canada. To some extent, they're system-wide, right, as it relates to the health system. In some instances, they're more digitally focused, and as I said, more on the service side as well. But if we were really to pick this apart, I guess, and what transformation actually means, question to the panelists: how would you kind of summarize what that means in a sentence or two? What would that look like, a transformation? So I might hand it over to Mohammed.
Hey, thanks, Kelly. In a couple of sentences, trying to describe what transformation might look like is difficult, but I'll try. Transformation for me is more about how we meet people where they are from a government service delivery perspective. So we make people's experiences better, no matter how they interact with government and how they access government services. So at the end of the day, it's all about people, it's all about their experience and how we're actually delivering that service to meet them where they are.
Okay. People focused, I like it. Yeah. How about you, Aaron? What do you think? What's transformation mean?
I'm completely aligned with Mohammed in terms of meeting people where they are and taking services to citizens. I think quite often what happens in large organizations, large bureaucracies, private or public sector, is that we end up serving ourselves more than we serve our clients. And in the public sector context, that can be quite often because we don't have the competitive pressure, whereas in the private sector context, you always have to be keeping up with what the competition are doing. And so in that context, I think transformation is really for the public sector to get back to the heart of what it's doing, and that's serving the people that it is meant to be serving, and putting them at the heart of everything that we're doing, and really thinking about the whole way that the organization would orientate itself to ensure that we have our clients or customers or users or whatever word you want to use at the heart of every decision that we make.
Right. Yeah. And Adil, you might have a different perspective here, because again, it's not just the health perspective, but perhaps a higher level system transformation. Is that different from what was said, or do you think it would be about the same?
Well, I'm totally aligned with my colleagues there. I would take it one step further in that I think there's a lot to be learned through transformation. And as soon as transformation is a project plan and not a growing opportunity in terms of learning, we're just transforming for the sake of an initiative rather than meeting people where we need to bring services to them. So I think to transform is to actually be very deliberate in learning and leading with purpose at the heart and center of everything we're doing. And in the public sector, our heart and center is the people we're serving. And we can continue to learn through various transformation initiatives about how to do better, both in the initiative you're in, but other ones that we would be serving in the future.
Right. And I'm sure a part of that too is also the internal workforce. You can transform for them, and hopefully you're transforming them, alongside delivering the better services to transform for citizens. And so that might mean the capabilities, right? The new capabilities in digital, for example, or whatever that may be. How about, so making the case for transformation is a theme that we've heard before from leaders. So you can be very fortunate and have the political side give you a mandate to transform. And at times they'll provide the investment for that, and the justification will not necessarily have to be made to great lengths to undertake a transformation. In other circumstances, you might have legacy technology that's been failing for years, creates a lot of risk for the organization, a lot of cyber risk. It does not serve staff or citizens well. And yet it's hard to convince the political side to invest in it because there's not an obvious return in terms of there's not a ribbon cutting around a new kind of modernized IT system that works internally. And so therefore the case for change might have to be a little bit different in that there might have to be a clear ROI and so on and so forth. I think, in your experience, how have you made the case for change when you've either felt the need for transformation, or even when you're making the case to, whether it's higher ups or whether it's colleagues, how have you gone about doing that? And what specific advice would you have for your peers who would go about this? And might start with Aaron on this one.
Yeah, I mean, it can be a tricky conversation, but ultimately, you stated it, Kelly, the case for change makes itself, particularly from a political perspective, when it comes to poor service delivery reflects badly on political ambitions and political activities. There is no point having the best policy in the world if it can't be delivered through any way, shape, or form. And quite often, the inhibitors to the delivery are the decades of legacy technology and debt that we have built up rightly, but ultimately end up creating huge amounts of inflexibility, and as you mentioned, huge amounts of system risk when it comes to actually the delivery of services. The other element clearly is the fact that we are all consumers of all services, and we're also parts of the ecosystem here in Canada, and therefore we all have voting rights, and therefore our politicians would want to listen to us as citizens, and citizens' expectations are moving. Mm-hmm. So the case for change is pretty much makes itself in many cases. However, you still have to do all of the hard work to work through what is the ultimate ambition and what's the ultimate goal that we're going for. To be perfectly frank, in many cases, it's hard for us to design new services which would be worse than the existing services that we provide today. Existing services that we provide today tend to be based upon systems of record which were brilliant, designed in the 60s, 70s, 80s, where effectively a computer system would do something with a computer record, which would scale and automate an automated process that wasn't automatable before. And what we're saying today is that today's service design means that you're not talking about automating an existing process. You're thinking about the whole way you deliver that service end to end from a very, very different context. So in that context of saying that you're going to take a service, put the citizen at the heart of it, design and test it with a citizen, and understand even before you get to scale, whether that service is actually going to meet its objectives. It's a very easy argument to make. However, it does take time, and that becomes the real risk. It's the case of can you gain enough political capital and small p, will and effort to sustain the energy over a long period. These transformation programs do not happen in a single year. It's quite likely they don't happen in a single parliamentary sitting. They are likely to be multiple parliamentary sittings, and therefore continuing to have that political small and lowercase and capital P buy-in is essential through the life cycle of the whole project, not just at the start.
Right. And just to follow up on that, Aaron, as you said, governments change. And so how do you keep that thread consistent across? Is it, practically speaking, is this when a new government comes in, this is the first thing you bring to them? You say, by the way, this is underway, and we need you to continue to fund this and support this for X, Y, and Z reasons. Is that maybe a good tactical approach there?
if it's a huge fundamental change to the way you deliver services, then it's going to be a high priority agenda item for any incoming political party. At the same time, we have to realize that we do serve our political masters and they can make their own decisions. There was certainly in the UK a case in the early 2000s, maybe mid 2000s. Oh no, it was about 2010, when there was a national identity system being put in place by the previous Labour government. Investment was made, technology was built, it was all there ready to go. Political parties changed, and the new political party, the Conservatives, decided they'd no longer wanted to invest in this. And we literally had to destroy all of the technology that went underpin it. Obviously, you can imagine the huge amounts of private information that was inside those, etc. So, political parties have a will, can make up their mind about the different things they want to do, but they have to be aware of the investment and the cost of doing that when they make that decision.
Yeah, great point. Mohammed, did you want to weigh in on that?
I agree with everything Aaron just said, because I think we all live in the same world at the end of the day when we're in public service. I would say the one thing government is in business of is they're in business of building trust. And trust can come from seamless service delivery. It could come from data protection. It could come from investing well. It could come from, there's a whole bunch of things that feed into trust. So when we're making the case for transformation, it's about how do we demonstrate that we're actually building trust with citizens that will reflect well on government. And then the other piece of it is we always have to make it real whenever we're building that case for transformation. And a lot of times I see business cases coming forward that we need to address this legacy technology debt, or we need to replace these systems or these tools. The reality is, what's the value in it as a public service? And how is that moving us closer to delivering seamless service delivery from an end user perspective? And we always have to push the boundaries around. We have to recognize, just like Aaron was saying, government was built siloed by nature. It was built in an analog world. Every legislation we have says MTO can only hold this data, health can only hold this data. But when we go into a digital world, we are expecting seamless services that we are only maybe sharing our addresses once, we're only sharing our name once. When I go into, say, Service Canada or Service Ontario, that I am only providing my ID once to get the services I need at that time that I need them. So the question then becomes is how do we make that disjointed service delivery model real for our political parties, real for the leaders that are in public service as well, and make them experience those pain points, and then also demonstrate how we can help improve those pain points. And I think as long as you can make it real, there's a case that automatically gets built. Changing between political parties is I've only been in government for about 6 years now. Changing between political parties, like Aaron said, it could shift, and it's pretty fluid depending on what that political party feels will build trust for them with the citizens.
Yeah, spot on. And I love that only 6 years in government. That's great. Awesome. Adil, did you want to jump in on that?
Yeah, in my previous role at Ontario Health, because we were kind of the middleware between government, policy, strategy, frontline delivery, I think what really helped in the transformation agendas was empathy for all parties. So much of it, you get stuck in the center of what you're trying to deliver without realizing what's the impact on the other areas and being mindful of what's important to those parties. One of the areas where we did really well as a tri-party initiative was looking at the government's 5-point plan to stay open. And one of the areas was getting patients to the right place. And for many years, we didn't have enough investment in the community sector. We were giving all the investment to the hospitals. Being able to communicate and understand what the system was feeling understand what the government was trying to deliver on and the bureaucracy trying to help activate that, we were able to align those type of goals so that we were able to get the appropriate resources to then disperse to the field. And at the end of everything, it's about that patient. And so constantly reminding all parties in the transformation initiative, what's the bottom line of this? What's behind that bullet point? What's behind that Excel cell? And what's behind that Word document is impact on that patient and their family and that community. And that having that North Star in front and center and understanding where people are, what their role and contribution is to that transformation was very helpful and impactful. So we were able to significantly increase investment beyond the hospital for alternative levels of care. But it's ongoing. So that transformation is now we're having to recalibrate. Are the resources going to the right place? Are we really distributing it appropriately? And again, empathy is back front and center to our change initiatives. So I totally agree with my colleagues. But again, I would take it one step further in the implementation piece.
Yeah. And I love that you mentioned that you're recalibrating, because I think that would be one of our takeaways for our company when working with clients is you do have to be flexible. We're going to get into this when we talk about agile governance, but when should you just pivot? Right? Like, if it's not working, stop and change, or reflect on what is working and what isn't working, right? On the topic of governance, we did talk a little bit about this when we hosted a session in September. I think what we typically find is public sector institutions tend to want to gravitate to maybe these more analog versions of governance. So those that are fixed, cumbersome, a little bit more consensus decision-making, and they're less flexible, less agile, and they tend to want to know the answer on day one and stick with it all the way through. And we would argue that, in fact, you do have to change who's around the table, who's giving you advice. You have to be agile and to be able to shift and change gears, as I mentioned, when things are starting to go wrong or and so on. So I guess when it comes to the topic of governance, when you're going through a transformation and even before, when you're thinking about setting up your governance, what are the things that you would recommend public servants consider in terms of who's around the table and what's the structure and the purpose of it? Might go to Mohammed on that one.
Thanks, Kelly. Just a couple of thoughts on governance. And in public sector, we have to remember that governance is not the outcome. And we spend a lot of time on governance, right? And the reality is, any organization I've been in, there isn't a perfect model to governance. It doesn't matter where you go. And we have to remember governance is more of a tool to get to a desired outcome, but it's not the outcome that we want to be getting to. A lot of the focus to me, and when you say agile governance, we need to think about how do we ensure that the things coming forward to governance tables are focused in on the outcomes we want to achieve, because that will make governance a lot simpler. And then it becomes how do you make sure that the things coming forward and the outcomes that we had selected to move forward, that we're sort of testing it, because the winds can shift and the contest can shift and the landscape can shift and the political parties can shift. So it becomes do we all agree on the outcome? Let the trusted teams to actually deliver on the work that needs to be delivered, give them the resources, give them the funding, give them what they need to do, have quick check-ins to make sure that they're still hitting the outcomes that we want to be delivering on, but then also provide feedback on what does the context say in the landscape today. So if we need to shift and if the outcomes need to shift, we can quickly do that going through governance. But like coming into government, I've spent a lot of time on governance tables, and a lot of it is typically focused on the wrong thing. It's focused either on the financial investment, or it's not to say we don't need to focus in on it, but there's a lot of time spent on financial investment on other things versus the outcome. And how do we come up with that outcome that we want to achieve to ensure that we'll be able to achieve agile governance? A lot of times we don't spend enough time on the outcomes. We try to fix governance. We try to say we're going to become more agile from a governance perspective. We're going to have less checkpoints, whatever. But we never spend enough time on how do we give the people the capabilities and the training and the skills to get to a place where the things coming forward to governance have already really well-defined outcomes that we want to achieve.
Great point. One, we've certainly seen a focus on process rather than outcomes. I might hand over to Aaron. Aaron, you are a senior leader on a major transformation project with the federal government. I know you've had many discussions around governance and what that looks like. Just kind of curious for your take on what that would look like in in an ideal model and what your advice would be.
Oh yes, we have many conversations about governance, Kelly. I think every public sector worker has lots and lots of conversations about governance as we go forward. And from a perspective of, if people are coming and hoping to see some significant disagreement between the panel members, I find myself just nodding along to everything that Mohammed is saying, because he's absolutely right. Somewhere along the line, through our various bureaucracies of assurance, we seem to have lost our focus on outcomes. And therefore the conversations become about how you go, exactly as you said, Kelly, how are you making sure that you're going to do the thing you told us you're going to do 10 years ago, rather than how are you going to improve the things, the outcomes for the people that you're serving. And I'd love for those people who have designed those systems to kind of sit there and redecorate their house or go on holiday and apply that methodology to it, because I'm pretty sure they wouldn't end up with the with what they were intending to get to in the first place. So our approach very much to kind of tackling this is to firstly think about exactly as Mohammed said, what's the purpose of governance? And the purpose being, well, actually the purpose is to ensure that we are making progress towards the outcomes we want to achieve for clients. And then there's a ton of things that go into that. But then what's the outcome? What's the purpose of a project over time? The purpose for the project has to be, how do you de-risk the delivery, the likelihood that you're not going to meet that outcome? And so what we have started to do is to try to tie both that outcome-focused view as well as a de-risking view to the way that we have our governance conversations. For example, we break, and this won't be unfamiliar to people, we break our delivery cycle down into distinct phases, discovery, alpha, and a beta. And at the end of a discovery, we will decide, and at the end of each phase, we'll decide if we're going to move forward or not. And those decisions can be made at governance with a view of saying, is it, from what we have learned, to come back to Adil's point, this is also about a learning culture. From what we have learned, is this initiative moving us closer to or further away from the outcome we're trying to achieve? And using that as the governance conversation, rather than, which is supported by finance and is supported by the, is it affordable and is it the right thing for us to do right now? All good conversations to have. But ultimately, pivoting the conversation to make sure it's focused on the thing that we want to get to. Are we making progress towards that? Are there any new risks in there that are going to stop us getting there? And how do we support ourselves through that process? Would be really important.
As a young kid, I used to love Toronto. That's because we didn't have any.
Sorry, we've got an issue here. Team, can you mute participants, please? Aaron and
My
the
first
team.
going to my first Oilers game was against the Kings. Dion was playing.
Oh, God.
Not sure what's happening here, but
Well, that's transformation at its finest.
yeah, it is.
I have to be number 21 or you saw me.
Or something.
Okay. Sorry about that, Aaron. You made some excellent points. Really, yeah, apologize on that. Why don't we move on? Looks like we've got guests muted now, so that's much better. Okay. Yeah, Aaron, did you want to wrap up with anything you were saying? Just because I think folks were really interested in hearing it, and I think we missed some of it. So maybe final thoughts on governance there would be great.
Just to summarize, exactly as Mohammed said, focus on the outcomes and then work out how governance decisions help you to de-risk it in small scales, which means that you're not at the end of it having some huge go, no-go decision and then biting your nails to know whether that go, no-go decision was the right thing to do over a weekend.
Got it. Okay, great. Let's move on. So So roadblocks, not dissimilar to what we just faced. So when you proceed with a transformation, I think once you're in the thick of it, roadblocks can appear, right? And they can take many different forms. You can realize, shoot, we don't really have the capability to deliver this. Maybe the change management wasn't, the launch wasn't clear, and so not everyone's clear on what you're trying to achieve and what their roles are. You can have stakeholders or staff kind of become change resistant. There's a lot of things that can happen along the way. And it's not easy to navigate that. And I think a governance model can only take you so far. As the leader of a transformation program or a senior leader overseeing it, you have to take some responsibility for I think interjecting to remove those roadblocks. What do you think are, what's the advice for leaders who are navigating roadblocks at, like, who should be their confidant maybe, or how should they address issues when they come up? Should it be a direct kind of head-on approach? Are there specific techniques that you've seen be used that are particularly helpful? And I might start with Adil on that.
It's a great question. I think there's, for me, in my experience, there hasn't been just one approach to removing roadblocks. To me, it really depends on the culture in which I am delivering a particular project. Mm-hmm. When I delivered a project in the Middle East, it was really about learning about the people around the table, learning about who they are, and building that strong rapport so that when roadblocks came, it wasn't me removing the roadblock. It was us removing it for that North Star that we've all agreed to. So that consensus building took a long time. It wasn't just about the project plan. That was just the end state. It was about getting to know your partners and solving those problems on a personal, individual level. When I come to North America, it's a lot about project plans, but again, you have to step back and be very empathetic about what everybody's contribution is, and demonstrating humility and say, oh, we have a problem. And sometimes it's, maybe I didn't intervene fast enough. Can you help me? And that humility aspect really helps in removing roadblocks. In other centers where I've done IT implementation, it was being proactive in assessing your risks over and over again so that you don't actually come to big roadblocks, but rather smaller challenges that you can tactically go around. So again, I think it is situational, but in the end, it does come back to your partners and knowing them and really building that sense of collaboration. It's not my initiative as the sponsor, it's our initiative. It's that type of contribution model that's important. I did find that when I had some observations, when the leader was really holding on to delivering it because that was their definition of success, the project always had issues. The leader could step back and really examine it and say, yeah, we have an issue and we need to solve this together. It was way faster to recalibrate and way faster to overcome those roadblocks. A bit more of a personal leader rather than a very systematic, tactical one. And it served me well in the different cultures I've worked in.
Yeah, that's brilliant. So it's a focus on the people side of change, do it upfront and early, get the buy-in to reduce the likelihood of having kind of the more people-oriented roadblocks down the road. Mohammed, I have heard about your style, that is your style as well, and it's quite effective. So kind of curious to hear about your advice for public sector leaders in this scenario.
Hey, thanks. I totally agree with Adil. And to your point, Kelly, I think that's probably just my natural style that comes out. I would say whenever teams come across roadblocks, I always encourage them, don't keep those roadblocks to themselves. Make sure people are aware of those roadblocks. And I find that teams come into challenges with delivering, say, initiatives when they try to address the roadblocks themselves. We have to remember we're trying to create an ecosystem where we're able to improve end-to-end service delivery And sometimes it's parts of that service delivery starts with one ministry, goes on to another ministry, and then on to another ministry. So we have to ensure we have integrated teams that can address roadblocks together. And then the second piece of it is don't make the decision on behalf of someone else, or don't think an issue is too small to raise and just highlight that we're coming across this roadblock. That's where some of those governance tables come in really handy, is making sure you have a cross section of people that can help co-sponsor the initiative and remove the roadblocks, and make sure that if there's things that you need from another ministry, that the people are there to help address those. And then just create an environment where people feel comfortable coming forward with those roadblocks. And they're not looked at to figure it out on themselves, or they got to figure out the funding pressures by themselves, or they got to figure out resource constraints. We're here to really help support the team achieve what they need to achieve. The team knows what they need to do, and you have to trust them to do it. You also have to build the trust that you are there to help remove the roadblocks for them. So that's my advice to people, is just make sure that you create an ecosystem or environment where people feel comfortable coming forward with roadblocks, and really make sure that you have the right people around the table to help remove those roadblocks.
Right. Yep, some good advice there. Aaron, did you want to add anything to that?
I guess only to say that sometimes you do find, and it can be very frustrating, that some roadblocks are truly immovable for reasons that are beyond any rational thought, but they are just truly immovable. And so as a leader, the challenge is, what do you do in that scenario? How do you kind of keep hold of that strong transformation vision that you are set out for, that your teams are bought into? Because obviously teams are very passionate about the work they do as well. And yet recognize that some things are just immovable at this point in time. And so being creative is really important. I think I agree completely with Mohammed and Adela. It is about the relationships you have with the people that you work with, and the governance boards, and how invested they are in the project that you're doing will speak volumes about the efforts that they will go to help you to move those roadblocks. But even with all of that, some things are truly immovable for a time. And the question really is, how do you keep momentum going and find alternative pathways whilst you work on the long term on taking down those hurdles and those roadblocks, which will go away eventually, but it's quite often just a matter of timing.
Okay, brilliant. Just want to change gears a bit. We talked a little bit about managing change, which I think we agree is very important, especially as we mentioned, talking about on the front end and making sure you've got buy-in from your peers and your stakeholders. I think one of the things that we've seen is quite challenging for the public sector is at times it just doesn't have the capability to do the transformation, right? There's a day-to-day. People have their day jobs in the public service, and that's what they're known, and that's what they know, and that's what they're specialists in. And so I think when we ask them to say, now you have to transform the HR function, that becomes a whole different type of role and gig, and things that they have to think about. And so at times, what hinders the transformation is the capability, but also it's the capacity. Again, if you still have to kind of do the standard business of government, where do you fit in time to actually transform the services? And at times that means you just need additional capacity. What do you think is the best delivery model on this front, considering the internal capabilities, external capabilities, the needs internally, the things that you might want? So for example, we tend to want our clients to lead and drive the transformation rather than us having be the face of it. We think that's when we're going to get most of the buy-in for the change. But curious to know kind of internal versus external capabilities, and what's the ideal model for transformation. And I might start with might go to Aaron on this one.
It's really tough for every organization to build these capabilities, right? Because it is such a saturated market. Everybody's going to be skills, and people's skills get more and more expensive as a result. In demand talent, and quite often the public sector struggles to compete on a wage basis with a number of the private sector organizations. So I think as an organization who is embarking upon a transformation, there's a number of different considerations here, but I think one of the core ones is what are the capabilities, and I don't mean people capabilities, I mean kind of business, architecture, organizational capabilities that you need within an organization to be successful, and have you got enough of them? And understanding whether those are therefore skills that you need to recruit and how you're going to recruit for them over the long term is really important, versus what you can do in the short term to just make a start somewhere. I think it's always a circular argument, you know, in terms of, do you outsource transformation? Do you insource transformation? Really, I think that the fundamental thing is, as an organization, what are the skills that means that you continue to have value and you continue to add value over the long term? How you choose to therefore deliver using those skills is down to you as an organization. But if you've got an organization, you realize you don't have the skills you want today and you buy them from the market, you'll achieve the transformation. You may achieve the transformation, you'll achieve the project success, as Adil mentioned before, but do you build the true organizational flexibility and agility that you're looking for? And I think that ultimately has to be the start of any conversation about what's the right talent that you need in your organization over the long term. And then it's a bit of an adjusting scale over time about how you choose to support your transformative projects through internal and external capability over time. But both have a role, without a doubt.
Okay, great. Mohammed, did you want to jump in on that one at all? Anything to say on the delivery model and capacity and capability?
No, I think Aaron said it. The biggest challenge we find is just the scale up of scale down, depending on the cycles of initiatives that are coming through, and how to attract the right skills when you're scaling up to ensure that the teams are equipped with the right sort of people to get the initiatives out there. Within the Ontario government, we do have a bit of a staff augmentation model that we've developed, and we're just revamping that a little bit to really become a mission-based team augmentation model. So as we see initiatives come forward, we are getting to a place where we're going to start evaluating, is the team structured in a successful manner? Do they have all the right skills and the capabilities? And if they don't, how do we quickly augment that team from a pool of resources to actually set them up for success? I would say, to your point, Kelly, a lot of times people don't have that capability in-house, so they will tend to lean on consulting firms or other things to bring that capability in. But I always follow the model of I do, we do, you do. If you don't have it at first, you got to have someone else show you what good is, and then you got to do it together with them, and then you got to transition that to the team somehow. So there has to be some sort of train, like we have to quickly be able to identify what are the capabilities that we're in short supply of, what are the capabilities that we're missing, and how do you start creating programs that start scaling the organization and those capabilities to ensure success for the long term.
Yeah, absolutely. The knowledge transfer aspect of the consultants can be helpful there, and it can help you kind of wean off any kind of dependency over time. Yeah, I agree on that one. Just a note to the audience: we're ready to take questions in a few minutes, so please drop them in the chat if you have any. Just want to ask all the panelists: could you give a bit of an example of when it did go wrong for you? And what did you do? What were the key things that you did to kind of get it back on track, or whether you got it back on track or just kind of down tools and gave up on it? Either way, what kind of experiences have you had with transformations gone wrong? So maybe Adil, I'll start with you on that.
Oh, many mistakes. And I think it's important to be very frank about those mistakes, to turn them around, and then they become actual opportunities to learn from. So the one initiative I had to do was doing an HIS implementation, and the clients we were working for had one vision of what the outcome is, and we had another vision, a contractual vision of what the outcome should be. And the two did not really see eye to eye, despite the fact that we were contracted by the government to do one thing for this institution, but the leadership at the institution was saying, why are you doing it this way? We've been here for 20 years. We'll tell you exactly what we need. And it almost washed out, because we started to really ground ourselves back into the contract language. I'm supposed to deliver X, and that's it. That rigid piece almost not only made our not only could it have eliminated our entire engagement on a transformation of an entire institution, but we switched, because strategically we needed to meet the actual people who are going to receive this service to where they needed the service to be. And by doing so, we were able to salvage the larger partnership with the government. And I think that the lesson learned there was try to step out of the particular initiative, understand the unintended consequences of being rigid versus being flexible. Both have their positives and negatives. And then, because of the relationships we forged, we could understand what type of social capital one initiative flexibility would buy at the larger initiative, right? So it was an important lesson, not only for me as a project leader, but I think my sponsor organization that was overseas in Toronto, because their business culture is, we have a contract, we deliver the contract. And this is the component of the contract, and having the relationship on both sides of the pond to really understand the cultural context and what it means to be rigid helped navigate execution. So the lesson learned there was understand the big picture, understand what the implications of one sliver on the rest of the pie, and really nurture those relationships so that you can overcome where those impasses are.
Great advice. Yeah. Aaron, did you want to jump in on that?
Being public servants, when things go wrong, they can be so public when things as well. And obviously, government IT is riddled with the stories of the front newspapers where things are not successful. And they can come at you from all sorts of angles that you weren't even predicting. In the one of the projects that I led in the UK was about how do we better provide information to UK citizens about what their state pension will be in the future. It's based on your earnings and your contributions over a period of time, and we created a brand new service, digital service, to do something that would traditionally had to require somebody to phone up, and took somebody with a pen and a paper and 3 hours on a spreadsheet to try to work out. And fantastic success. Moved it to basically serving 10 times more citizens and reducing the overhead of actually doing it by 50% for the teams, allowing people to get more creative. However, there was a flaw in the data, in some of the data. And this ended up in the money pages of the Sunday Times, where effectively people were complaining that when they went to their state pension forecast service, that didn't quite match what they actually ended up getting paid. And so we were obviously, this didn't go down very well with the minister's office or the minister, and we were in daily meetings with the minister and trying to work out how we went through. All good stuff, all great learning. I think what Adil says is absolutely the key learning that comes out of that. This is about relationships when things go wrong, and how do you use the opportunity. So dig your heels in and say, yes, we were right all the way along, or hold your hands up and say, look, some things, because of the complexity of the system that we deal with, are beyond everybody's control. We're talking about data that was 50 years in the system, suddenly churning out results in a way that was unexpected and hadn't come up in testing, because there was a million different ways that data and pensions data could go through. So by building that relationship with the minister and basically correcting it over time and showing how we made progress on improving it, it made a big difference to the relationship, but it also meant that we had that trust with the minister's office to be able to go to them in the future and say, hey, you know, this could be a risk for you in the future. Ultimately, we find that people don't mind when things go wrong. They really care when it comes as a surprise. So, you know, what Mohammed said before about teams not keeping roadblocks themselves is absolutely true. If you're open with your frailties, open with your concerns, and open with your risks, then people will quite often lean in to help.
Yeah, that's very important. Mohammed, pass to you.
I'm not going to talk about any project specifically, because I think if you just Googled government transformation project that went wrong, you will have a long list. What I will say is some of the lessons learned that I take with me whenever I go across a project or have been involved in a project that's gone sideways is, one, never hide risks. Just like what Aaron was saying, I think people don't like surprises when you go live. People want to know what those surprises might be or what the risks are when going live. And a lot of the, if you take a look at a lot of the case studies out there that from a government transformation gone wrong, there was a specific date, but no one raised the risks of what would go wrong if they were to go live on a specific date for a transformation. The other piece I would share with everyone here is to what Ada was saying, when teams start getting into a place where they start going down to contract language, you have to sort of reset for a second and really get the teams to think about what are the outcomes we were initially trying to achieve and what are the impacts to those outcomes. Because there's a couple of projects I just recently got involved in where teams were going down the contract road. You said you would deliver this. This is how much we were going to pay. We're saying we're only going to deliver this. We have to remember strategy is fluid. The landscape we live in is fluid, and we have to be able to adjust our plans based off of that fluidity. So when we start thinking about outcomes, we always want to make sure that we're just checking back to the outcomes that we want to achieve to ensure we're still going to deliver on what we want to deliver on versus a de-scoped, defunded, de-whatever project that comes through and people deliver it, but then it's totally disconnected from where we wanted it to be. So those are the two big things I would just share with the audience here.
Yeah, that's excellent. And I think even on the from the private sector side, I think having contracts that are a little bit more outcomes focused rather than prescriptive steps would I think also help along those lines. So I want to just turn to questions from the audience. So I got one here from Carly in Manitoba. So can anyone speak specifically to anything different you would suggest when the change project involves a culture change and how to engage the political side in a public service transformation? So it looks like there's two questions there. So maybe on the culture change side, any experience to speak to there, any learnings from doing kind of a cultural change transformation, and certainly we see that on digital, even if it's not culture specific, it's certainly an aspect of digital. So I don't know, Mohammed, did you want to address that one, or any Adil, Aaron?
The only thing I'll share is culture change is difficult, period. It doesn't matter what organization you are in, culture shift is difficult. I would try to entrench that culture change into why we're doing it. So really speaking to both the political side of what is the outcome we want to achieve and why. Like, what is the value add to building trust for government? And why are we doing that? And then also echo that back to the teams on why we're doing this work. Because if we aren't clear on why we're doing something, culture change will not happen. Everyone is going to still get entrenched into the way they do work today versus how they should be doing work in the future. So if I go back into, if we want to increase government trust and seamless services or user-centric services are a component of increasing that digital trust, We really have to remove the silos across our ministries. We really have to look at policy and legislation that allows us to do that. We really have to come up with different ways of doing work. It can't be MTO does a piece, MOH does a piece, Service Ontario does a piece. They all have to work together, and we have to work as if we're one organization. And that's the true way that we're going to be able to shift culture. And that goes to any project or any initiative. It's not just focusing in on the culture shift or culture change we have to do. It's why are we changing our culture, and what is the value add that we're bringing that increases our trust with our end users.
Great, thanks. Adel, did you want to jump in on that?
I think Mohammed eloquently described what we need to do. I think as leaders, we also need to have courage to actually embrace that culture change. And it's not going to be easy. It's not going to be smooth, but you have to be a courageous person and build a courageous team to come forward. And courage also means to be able to make space so that people can contribute their dissent and embrace their contrary view. And if you don't create that space, then people will feel like change is happening to them, not with them. And I think from a change management perspective, you really need to be able to create that culture through creating space and embracing those healthy challenges to how things are moving forward or not. And that requires more and more feedback and recalibration. I think Gina totally agrees with me right now.
Oh, okay. Thanks for that, Adil. Great. Well, we're just ending the session right now, so I do want to close. Great. Just to wrap up, I think we promised at the beginning of this session we'd want to give public sector leaders at least 4 key takeaways. The ones that I heard, if I can just articulate those back, is the first one being the importance of relationships, building trust, working with peers, working across silos, and getting alignment, I think, at the beginning on what you're trying to achieve, which will help you address roadblocks together, I think, down the road. Raising issues early, raising risks early, obviously keeping the minister's office abreast of what's happening and what are some of those risks that they might need to address. Focusing on the outcomes, really in the way that you design the governance, in what the governing body focuses its attention on. So rather than processes, really speaking about what you're trying to achieve and how do you just align efforts to get to those outcomes. And then also, I think on the transformation plan itself, at the end of the day, the outcome is for the citizens because this is public service, and whatever the government's trying to do at any level or public sector organization is ultimately for the benefit of citizens. So really being across, that's the end goal, whether it's better services or services that are more efficient or less expensive. So those were my takeaways. I thought the learnings were excellent. So thank you for giving some of the really practical advice. It was really helpful, and hopefully everyone found it useful. Thanks for taking the time, Adil, Aaron, and Mohammed. Really, really appreciate it. I know you're crazy busy these days transforming things and doing great work. So appreciate you taking the time. Thanks, everyone. Great. Take care.